Shalom Havarim and hello friends. It's good to see you on this Sunday morning or whenever you're watching. Hey, I just got some news. You may know that we're just located down the hill from Stanton City's middle school and one of the elementary schools. Just got some news for all you parents and the children who have kids in those grade levels here in the city. Just found out that tomorrow morning there will only be a half day of school. Yeah, the other half will be in the afternoon. Yeah, that one killed last Sunday whenever I told it to the church. And if you realize that I'm doing this on a Monday morning, this is the second time that I've ever had to re-video a sermon because I didn't get the sound last time. So yesterday I recorded a sermon and I guess the video looks good, but there's no sound at all. Maybe that's the best way to watch one of my sermons is without the sound. I don't know, but the thing is that I'm still learning. I have a new system here, trying to figure it all out, and that's actually kind of the point today. I'm talking about being a lifelong learner. This is our back to school Sunday, so we talked about how we as even adults, even if you've been out of school, 10, 20, 50 years out of high school, we're still called to learn. As long as there's something that we can do to make ourselves better, to better our lives and the lives of others, we're called to do it. And yes, in school, the kids are learning things like math and writing and reading. They're even learning things like phys ed and health. But I also want to say today that we also need to remember to focus on our spiritual learning as well. Our theology, our how to be church, our ecclesiology. So today we're going to be looking at not just exercising our mind and our body. We're trying to see how to become lifelong learners to develop our minds, bodies, and spirits. So I want to start this morning with a quote from a friend of mine, and I quoted this guy 2 weeks ago, and it's kind of weird because I've never quoted him before, but I really felt like it was a good idea to include something that he said in two sermons just 2 weeks apart. So this person is Dr. Richard Aldifer. He's a retired physician. And just a little background information on physicians in case you're not familiar with what all goes into being a physician. You don't just walk into a hospital and say, hey, I want to apply for a job as a doctor. To be a physician, you have to go through 4 years of undergraduate studies, and then you do 4 years of medical school. After you complete medical school, you still have to do residency. You have to take, actually before you do the residency, you take your examination to be licensed for medicine. And then once you're done with your licensing and residency, you just stop learning, right? No, of course not. Like, we want our medical personnel to be well educated and up to date on things. I'm really glad. Like, they don't just let anybody go through medical school. You have to do really well in your undergraduate studies. You have to do really well in your graduate courses. I'm happy for that. That's good because you don't just want anybody to be prescribing your medication or cutting you open. So I'm glad it takes some intellect to be able to do this. So these medical personnel, they need to continue to learn even after they are in their practice. And maybe that's one reason they call it medical practice. You're still learning as you go. A physician needs to continue to read medical journals. They go to these conferences. And if anything, we've seen this in 2020 and 21, that these medical personnel, they still have to continue to learn because things are changing. Things are improving. Things are not the same as they were when they first went through medical school. So that's a little background on who Dr. Richard Aldifer is. He's a guy that went through all this, a guy that I respect, a recently retired physician. So last week, Dr. Aldifer posted this on Facebook. He wrote, "One of the best ways to grow is to surround yourself with friends that are smarter than you are. That's it. Thanks to all of you. So this kind of caught me off guard when I read it from a person that I respect, a person that I look up to. You know, not only is Dr. Aldifer an accomplished physician, also a very well-respected member of our community. He volunteered at the local free clinic. Before he moved to Harrisonburg to retire, he was, well, he still is a churchman, but he was a part of the local church, Springdale Mennonite Church in Stuart Straff, just a little bit away from here. And I remember a few years back when that church was looking for a pastor, I did a series of teachings on Wednesday evenings. And every Wednesday evening, Dr. Aldifer would show up and he would sit in the front row, and you could tell that he had done his homework and he read the assignment for the week. He came with questions and he wanted to interact and dialogue with me as a teacher. This was a guy that wanted to continue to learn. And his advice to be a lifelong learner was to surround yourself with people who know more than you do. So I'm calling that the Aldifer method for learning. It's Aldifer methodology. Surround yourself with smart people, and you too will learn. Well, our scripture for this morning is the story of the calling of Samuel. And Samuel was an Old Testament prophet. In the story about Samuel, we find kind of his backstory. It tells us that his mother, Hannah, was not able to conceive. So Hannah prayed to God that if God gave her a child, that she would dedicate this child to the Lord. So the baby was born. She had a boy. She named it Samuel. And the text tells us after Samuel was weaned, she took Samuel to the local synagogue in Shiloh, and she gave the child to God. And what does that look like? It says that she went up to the local rabbi. His name was Eli, and she gave him her child, like 1-2 years old, like just weaned. And I'm sure that Eli's like thank you. What do I do with this? So it's so weird to us in our modern kind of sensibilities. But it wasn't quite as strange back then. Think about it like this. Hannah wanted to have her son grow up to be a servant of the Lord. So what better place would there have been for him to learn to serve the Lord than in the local synagogue? And who better for him to learn from than from the local rabbi? So what Hannah was doing is she was using the Aldifer methodology for passing this wisdom onto her child. She surely could have taught him some things as well. Oh, of course she could teach him some things. But he could learn the best in that situation. Now, this was, like I said, it's weird to think of it like that she just sent her child off to learn there. But even like 100 years ago, we would have seen this more frequently, even in our country as well. Back then, we would have called this an apprenticeship. And I think of these master craftsmen, like a master blacksmith. And I don't really know a lot about blacksmithing, but they do some blacksmithing down here at the Frontier Culture Museum. So I'm nearly an expert. I've seen somebody do it for like 5 minutes. No, I'm not an expert by any means, but I've seen these guys at work. And I imagine a master craftsman taking on an apprentice, maybe a 10-year-old boy. And it would have been usually a boy in those days. And at first, the master craftsman's the one doing all the working with the steel, while the boy's doing like the grunt work. He's collecting the wood for the forge and the fire, or maybe they're burning coal, whatever they're burning. He's bringing it into the blacksmith's shop. He's the one that's gathering the raw materials, and maybe he starts to deliver some of these things when they've been completed. He's taking the completed steel items to the clients. But as years go by, he's been watching and helping this master craftsman. And he begins to make his own items. Maybe something simple at first. He's making some nails. But time goes by and he steps it up a little bit. He begins to make latches. And then years go by and he's making things like machinery parts and tools. And after these years go by, no longer is this just an apprentice. This boy has become a master craftsman himself. So you see how this knowledge is passed on from this master craftsman to this apprentice until the apprentice becomes his or herself a master craftsman as well. Now, in our modern 21st century educational system, we actually see something similar to this. And one of the things that comes to mind, one of the examples, is the example of a student teacher. Because you don't just go to the local university and take your classes and they say, okay, now you're in charge of these kids. No. They begin by having a full semester of student teaching, where a student, a college student, is placed with an older, experienced, tenured teacher. And at first, that student teacher is kind of like a glorified babysitter. They maybe help lead the kids back and forth and make sure that they are, cleaning up after themselves. Probably depends on the grade level. But after a few weeks, they're doing more. They're teaching some lessons themselves. They're grading some papers. Maybe by the end of the semester, they're even writing some curriculum and planning lessons for the day. Then by the time they are completely done, then they are ready to have their own class. You see, this is the way we learn. We learn from those who know more than we do, those that have more experience than we. And I joke around, there was an old cartoon of a picture of Garfield, the cat. And he's there, he's got books strapped to his head and strapped to his arms and his legs, and the caption on this poster, I remember seeing it when I was maybe like 7th and 8th grade. It said, "I'm learning through osmosis." And it's meant to be a joke, but you know what? I think that's exactly one of the ways that we learn, and one of the ways we learn best is by absorbing things from our environments. So I come back to our scripture for today, and we see this example of Eli and Samuel learning together in a community. Eli is this experienced rabbi, Samuel, this young boy. But this isn't the only place where we see this kind of relationship in the Bible. We see Jesus living with his disciples. They walk together, they eat together, they live together. They hear him teach, they see him preach, they see the way he lives his life, and they learn from him. But the disciples don't keep that information to themselves. No. In the book of Acts, we read about the Apostle Paul and his transformation. He met Jesus on the road to Damascus, and he didn't immediately become this missionary. No. He first went and he lived with the disciples. He lived with the people who lived with Jesus, and they passed on information to him. And then when Paul goes out on his missionary journeys, he doesn't go alone. He takes people with him like Timothy. So I see that with these examples, what I've called the Aldifer method, or the Aldifer methodology, is actually biblical methodology. It's not new to Dr. Aldifer. No, he didn't invent it. This has been around for a long time. And whether we call it an apprenticeship or mentorship or something else, it looks the same. If you really want to learn something, surround yourself with people who know more than you do. Now, I know that different people learn in different ways. Some people are visual learners, and some people have to hear things. Some people have to write it out. Some have to get their hands in there and do it themselves to learn. And that's all very well and good. I too understand that I learn differently than other people. But it doesn't mean that we don't still learn best in community. Even if you're learning visually or by listening or getting your hands dirty, doing it in community always gives us the chance to share these ideas, to go back and forth with other people, to test ideas, and to grow in our understanding. So let's come back to the scripture one more time. We have this text where the young Samuel is living with Eli. And it says in this text that God hasn't been speaking to the people for a while. But one night, this young Samuel hears the voice calling to him. It says, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel gets up and he goes to his mentor, Eli, and he wakes him up. And Eli's like, what are you doing? Go back to bed. Samuel says, I heard you calling for me. And he's like, no, I was sleeping. You woke me up. You know I wasn't talking. Like, what are you doing? Go back to bed. And this happens again. And again, Samuel wakes up Eli, and Eli sends him back to bed. It happens a third time, and finally the light goes on for Eli. He says, wait. This is actually God calling you. Next time you hear this voice, this is what you say. It says in verse 9, so Eli told Samuel, go and lie down. And if he calls you, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Now, the thing I like about this passage is we see something that wasn't expected. Because I want to ask you, who learned in this situation? Who's the person that grew in this situation? Who gained more knowledge? Well, I think both people did. Both the aged person, the older, experienced mentor, and the young, inexperienced mentee. Eli had never spoke to God in that way. That's why the text opens by saying God hadn't spoken for a period of time. Samuel didn't know what to expect. He thought this was Eli calling him. But they both brought their experiences and their understandings together, and they shared that information. And they both learned something new that day. So this is where I want to expand upon the Aldifer method a little bit. I think Dr. Aldifer is absolutely right. If you want to learn something, surround yourself with people who know more than you do. Where I want to expand it a little bit is to say, yeah, indeed, you can learn from people that you think are smarter than you, but don't forget to learn from people who you think you're smarter than as well. Now, I know that doesn't sound real humble because, you have to say that, maybe you feel like you are smarter than other people. Let's be honest. You probably feel like you're smarter than somebody, right? The joke is, I said the other day, Larry the Cable Guy used to make a joke that don't feel bad because half the world is below average. So, this pastor did just quote Larry the Cable Guy in a sermon. But the point is that there's people that you probably think you know more than they do, right? But I want to throw a little bit of a cliche at you here. You've probably heard something like this before. Some people believe that they can learn something from everyone that they meet. Others believe they can only learn from a certain kind of person. Both are correct. If you believe that you can only learn from people who are smarter than you, then you're not going to learn from the people who aren't as smart as you. But if you are open to believing that you are going to learn something from everyone that you come in contact with, well, then you will learn something from everyone. And it might be something as simple as you learn how to be kind, or you learn how to be compassionate, you learn how to be nice, or you just learn better listening skills. But you know what? Those aren't bad things. That's good to learn those skills. It's good to be more compassionate. It's good to be a good listener. So I believe very strongly that we can learn something from everyone, even the people that you think you're smarter than. You see, being a lifelong learner requires humility. It requires you admitting that you don't know it all, and that's hard for us sometimes. I don't know it all. You don't know it all. And if you didn't know that before, now you do. We can learn, and we must continue to learn. We learn from each other. We learn from the books that we read, the podcasts we listen to. We learn from the communities that we surround ourselves with. And we grow by discussing these things, these challenging issues, digging deeper, and learning at another level. My friends, if you are studying something like biology or law or even French cuisine, you know that there's always more that you can learn. Even if you got something as complicated as like the Krebs cycle figured out, you can always go to the next level. Even if you have biology figured out, then you can go to microbiology. If you go from microbiology to whatever's after that, subatomic particles, I don't know. And if that's true in biology or law or French cuisine, how much true is it in our theological understanding? We can never fully understand God, but we can always learn more. We can grow. We can grow deeper in our understanding, our knowledge, and our love for God and each other. So my challenge for you today is to be a lifelong learner. Continue to learn from one another, the people that you are smarter than, the people that you think you know more than, and the people who are brilliant in surrounding you. A true lifelong learner is open and willing and humble enough to learn from everyone. All right, my friends, have a great week and continue to learn and love one another.